The sound of breaking glass shattered the silence in the Crescent Saloon, and Henry Hawthorne knew his life was about to change in ways he could never have predicted. It was the spring of 1878 in Fort Sumner, New Mexico Territory, and the sun hung low over the dusty streets like a copper penny refusing to drop. Henry stood at the bar, whiskey in hand, when the front window exploded inward. A woman stumbled through the shattered frame, blood trickling from a cut on her temple, her dress torn at the shoulder. She looked up at him with the most honest eyes he had ever seen, brown and clear as creek water, holding no deception or manipulation, just fear and determination in equal measure. "Please," she gasped, "he is coming." Henry moved without thinking, decades of cowboy instinct taking over. He pulled her behind him as a heavy-set man with wild eyes and whiskey breath came crashing through what remained of the window frame. "That woman stole from me," the drunk bellowed, pointing a shaking finger. "I did no such thing," the woman said firmly from behind Henry, her voice steady despite her obvious fear. "I finished your wife's dress exactly as ordered. If you refuse to pay for honest work, that does not make me a thief." Henry recognized the drunk as Pete Morrison, a ranch hand known for causing trouble when he had been drinking. "Pete, you need to sleep this off. Whatever business you have can wait until morning. Get out of my way, Hawthorne. This is between me and that seamstress." The bartender, old Clyde Ramsey, had already fetched the sheriff, and within moments, Sheriff Tom Baker arrived, gun drawn. "That is enough, Morrison. You are coming with me." As the sheriff hauled Pete away, Henry turned to face the woman. She was wiping blood from her temple with a handkerchief, her hands steady despite what had just happened. She could not have been more than 22 or 23, with dark brown hair that had come loose from its pins and those remarkable honest eyes that seemed to look straight into his soul. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I am Margaret Thompson. I run the seamstress shop on 2nd Street, Henry Hawthorne." He tipped his hat. "You ought to have that cut looked at. I will be fine. It is not the first time I have dealt with customers who think they can take advantage of a woman working alone." There was steel in her voice, a quiet strength that made Henry's heart do something strange in his chest. "All the same, let me walk you to Doc Patterson's. It is getting dark." Margaret hesitated, then nodded. As they walked through the settling dusk, Henry found himself stealing glances at her. She walked with her head high, despite the blood on her face and her torn dress. There was a dignity about her that he had rarely seen. "You are the rancher who is engaged to Constance Whitmore, are you not?" Margaret asked as they approached the doctor's office. The words hit Henry like a punch to the gut, reminding him of the very thing he had been trying not to think about for weeks. "Yes, she is a lucky woman." Henry did not respond to that. The truth was far more complicated than Margaret could know. His engagement to Constance Whitmore, the mayor's daughter, had been arranged more than decided upon. Their families had neighboring ranches, and Mayor Edmund Whitmore had made it clear that combining the properties through marriage would benefit everyone. Henry had agreed because it made business sense, because Constance was beautiful and refined, and because at 29 he figured it was time to settle down and start a family. But he had never felt his heart race when he looked at Constance the way it was racing right now, walking beside a seamstress with honest eyes and dirt on her dress. Doc Patterson cleaned and bandaged Margaret's wound, pronouncing it minor. Henry insisted on walking her home afterward, and she did not protest. Her shop was a modest building with living quarters above, the front window displaying carefully stitched dresses and shirts. "Thank you again, Mr. Hawthorne," Margaret said as they reached her door. "Henry." "And it was nothing. It was not nothing to me." She met his eyes, and for a moment the world seemed to narrow to just the two of them standing in the lamplight. Then Margaret turned and disappeared inside, leaving Henry standing alone on the boardwalk, wondering what had just happened to him. He walked slowly back toward his horse, his mind churning. He had a duty to Constance, to his family, to the agreement that had been made. But those honest eyes haunted him with every step. The next morning, Henry rode into town to meet Constance for lunch, as had become their weekly custom. She was waiting at the hotel restaurant, dressed in an elaborate blue gown that probably cost more than most people in Fort Sumner made in a month. Her blonde hair was perfectly arranged, her posture impeccable. She looked like a porcelain doll, beautiful and untouchable. "You are late," Constance said as he took his seat. "Sorry, one of the mares was having trouble this morning." Constance wrinkled her nose slightly. "I do hope you are not going to smell like horses during our lunch," Henry bit back a response. He had scrubbed clean before coming to town, but he was a rancher. Horses were part of his life. "How have you been?" Frustrated, Constance said, launching into a detailed complaint about the seamstress who was making her wedding dress. "She refuses to understand what I want. I have explained 3 times that I need Belgian lace, not French lace, and she keeps insisting that Belgian lace is impossible to get out here. Well, Daddy is the mayor. If I want Belgian lace, she should find a way to get it. Who is making your dress?" Henry asked, though he had a sinking feeling he already knew. "Some woman named Margaret Thompson. Honestly, I am considering going to Santa Fe to find someone more competent." Henry found himself defending Margaret before he could think better of it. "I have heard she does good work." "How would you know anything about seamstresses?" Constance looked at him with amusement. "Just talk around town." The lunch continued, with Constance discussing wedding plans that Henry had no input on and sharing gossip about various townspeople. She never asked about his ranch, his work, or anything about his life. It struck him suddenly how little they actually talked to each other, how little they knew about each other despite being engaged for 6 months. After lunch, Henry found himself riding past Margaret's shop. He told himself he was just making sure she had recovered from yesterday's incident. Through the window, he could see her bent over her work, needle flying through fabric with practiced skill. She looked up, and their eyes met through the glass. She smiled, small but genuine, and Henry felt that strange flutter in his chest again. He should have ridden away. Instead, he found himself tying his horse and entering the shop. "Mr. Hawthorne," Margaret said, standing up from her work. "What a surprise." "Henry," he corrected. "I wanted to check that you were all right after yesterday. As you can see, I am still standing." She gestured to the bandage on her temple. "A bit marked up, but that will heal. Good." Henry found himself at a loss for words, something that rarely happened to him. "What are you working on?" "A wedding dress, actually, for Constance Whitmore." Margaret's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in those honest eyes. "Your fiancé." "Right." The word felt heavy in his mouth. "She has very particular tastes," Margaret said diplomatically. "That is one way of putting it." Margaret smiled slightly at that. "It will be a beautiful dress, even without Belgian lace. French lace is actually superior in my opinion, more delicate and refined. But I am just the seamstress. What do I know? I suspect you know quite a bit." Henry stepped closer, examining the partially completed dress on the mannequin. "This work is incredible. Thank you. I learned from my mother. She was the finest seamstress in Philadelphia before she died." "Philadelphia? That is a long way from New Mexico territory." "My father was a banker there. After Mother died, he could not bear to stay. He brought me out here when I was 16, hoping for a fresh start. He passed 2 years ago, left me the building and his savings. I turned the ground floor into my shop." There was grief in her voice, but also pride. "I am sorry for your losses. Thank you. Life goes on, as they say." Margaret looked at him carefully. "Why are you really here, Henry?" The directness of the question caught him off guard. No manipulation, no games, just honest curiosity. "I do not know," he admitted. They stood there in the quiet shop, surrounded by half-finished dresses and spools of thread, and Henry felt more at peace than he had in months. But peace was a luxury he could not afford. He had obligations, commitments, a future already mapped out. "I should go," he said reluctantly. "Yes, you should," Margaret agreed. But her eyes said something else entirely. Over the following weeks, Henry found excuses to come into town more often than necessary. He told himself he was checking on supplies, meeting with the bank, dealing with ranch business. But somehow his errands always led him past Margaret's shop. Sometimes he stopped in, sometimes he just rode by, but always his eyes sought her out. They began to talk, really talk, in a way Henry had never talked to anyone. Margaret told him about growing up in Philadelphia, about the society women who would look down on her mother despite relying on her skills, about learning to see through people's facades to who they really were. Henry told her about growing up on the ranch, about losing his mother when he was 12, about his father's expectations and the weight of family legacy. "You love her?" Margaret asked one afternoon. They were sitting in her shop, ostensibly because Henry was ordering new shirts, but really because neither of them wanted to leave. "Constance." Henry shook his head slowly. "I respect her. I admire her beauty. But love, I do not know what love is supposed to feel like." "It is supposed to feel like you cannot breathe right when they are not around," Margaret said quietly. "Like the world has more color when you see them, like being honest is easier than hiding." Their eyes met, and Henry knew with absolute certainty that she was describing exactly how he felt about her. And from the way she looked at him, with those honest eyes reflecting everything in her heart, she felt the same way about him. "I am engaged," Henry said, as much to remind himself as her. "I know it would not be right. I know that too, but I cannot stop thinking about you. I know." Margaret's voice was barely a whisper. "I cannot stop thinking about you either." Henry stood abruptly, needing distance. "I made a commitment. The wedding is in 3 months. Both families are counting on it. I cannot just walk away." "I am not asking you to," Margaret said, standing as well. "I would never ask you to break your word. That is not who I am." "What do we do then? You go marry Constance Whitmore. You build the life that everyone expects you to build. And I stay here, making dresses and living alone, and we both pretend this never happened." Tears glistened in Margaret's eyes, but her voice remained steady. Henry wanted to cross the room, to take her in his arms, to kiss her and forget about everything else. But he was not that kind of man. He kept his word, honored his commitments, did what was right even when it tore him apart. "Goodbye, Margaret," he said. "Goodbye, Henry." He walked out of her shop and did not look back, though every fiber of his being wanted to. He mounted his horse and rode toward the Whitmore ranch, toward his duty, toward a future that suddenly felt like a prison sentence. Mayor Edmund Whitmore's ranch was twice the size of Henry's, a sprawling estate that spoke of wealth and influence. Constance was in the garden when Henry arrived, surrounded by servants who were hanging decorations for the engagement party scheduled for the following week. "Henry," she called out, waving him over. "Come tell me if you think these ribbons are too much." Henry looked at the elaborate display of ribbons, flowers, and bunting. It looked like half of Texas had been transformed into decorations. "It is very festive." "That is not an answer," Constance frowned. "Do you like it or not? If you like it, then it is perfect." "You never have opinions about anything regarding our wedding," Constance said, irritation creeping into her voice. "It is like you do not even care." "I care." "Do you?" Constance stepped closer, studying his face. "Sometimes I wonder if you even want to marry me." It was the most honest thing she had ever said to him, and it caught Henry completely off guard. "Why would you say that?" "Because you look at me the way my father looks at his account books, like I am a task to be completed, not a woman to be loved." Henry did not know how to respond. She was right, but admitting it would hurt her, and he had no desire to cause pain. "We should not have this conversation here," he said instead. "Then where?" "When? We are getting married in 3 months, Henry. Should we not talk about what we actually feel before we bind ourselves together for life?" "What do you want me to say?" "I want you to say that you love me," Constance said, her voice rising. "I want you to say that marrying me is not just a business arrangement. I want you to look at me the way you look at that seamstress." The blood drained from Henry's face. "What? Do not play dumb. Half the town has seen you going into her shop, spending time with her. People talk, Henry. I have been ordering shirts, that is all, for weeks." "Do you think I am stupid?" Constance's eyes flashed. "I know what I see, and I see a man who comes alive around another woman in a way he never does with me." Henry could not deny it. The truth sat between them like a wall. "I have never been inappropriate with Margaret. I have honored our engagement. But you want to be with her. That does not matter. I gave you my word. I will marry you, Constance. I will be a faithful husband. I will build a life with you." "How generous," Constance said bitterly. "Every girl dreams of a husband who stays with her out of obligation." "What do you want me to do? Call off the wedding? Humiliate both our families? Destroy the alliance our fathers have worked toward?" "I want you to want me," Constance shouted, tears streaming down her perfect face. "Is that so much to ask?" Henry felt a wave of guilt crash over him. Constance was not a bad person. She was vain and particular, yes, but she did not deserve to be married to a man whose heart belonged to someone else. "I am sorry. I truly am. Sorry does not fix this." Constance wiped her eyes, smearing her carefully applied makeup. "Get out. I need to think." Henry left, feeling worse than he had in his entire life. He had tried to do the right thing, to honor his commitments, but in doing so he had hurt someone who deserved better. He rode back toward his ranch, but halfway there he changed direction, heading back into town. He needed to talk to Margaret, though he had no idea what he would say. The shop was closed when he arrived, but he could see lamplight in the upstairs window. He knocked on the door, loudly enough that she would hear from above. After a few moments, Margaret appeared at the window, then came down to unlock the door. "Henry, what is wrong?" "Everything," he said, stepping inside. "Constance knows about my feelings for you." Margaret's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh no, Henry, I am so sorry. It is not your fault, it is mine. I should have stayed away, but I could not." "What did she say?" "That she does not want to marry a man who does not love her. She is right. She deserves someone who looks at her the way I look at you." Margaret wrapped her arms around herself. "What are you going to do?" "I do not know. If I break the engagement, it will cause a scandal. Mayor Whitmore will be furious. My father will be disappointed. The business arrangement falls apart. But you would be free." "Free to do what?" "Chase after a seamstress and prove everyone right who said I was being a fool." The words came out harsher than Henry intended, and he saw Margaret flinch. "Is that what you think? That being with me would make you a fool?" "No, that came out wrong. I just meant that people would talk, would judge. My reputation, your reputation. I am a seamstress, Henry. I work with my hands and live above my shop. I do not have a reputation to worry about beyond being honest and good at my trade. But you are a rancher, part of a founding family, engaged to the mayor's daughter. We live in different worlds." "I do not care about different worlds." "Maybe you should." Margaret's voice was sad but firm. "Maybe you should go back to Constance and find a way to make it work. Build the life you are supposed to have. Forget about me." "I tried that already. It did not work." They stood facing each other across the darkened shop, the air heavy with everything they wanted but could not have. Finally, Henry closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. "I love you," he said simply. "I have never said those words to anyone before, but I am saying them now. I love you, Margaret Thompson. I love your honest eyes and your strength, and the way you see the world clearly without illusions. I love how you make me want to be a better man. And I know I have no right to say any of this because I am engaged to someone else, but I cannot hold it in anymore." Tears streamed down Margaret's face. "I love you too. I have loved you since you stepped in front of me at the saloon, since you walked me to the doctor, since the first real conversation we had. But love is not always enough, Henry. Sometimes circumstances are stronger than feelings." "Then we change the circumstances." "How?" "You break your engagement, embarrass Constance, anger your family, ruin a business deal. And for what? For me. A seamstress with no connections or money. How long before you start resenting me for everything you gave up?" "I would never resent you." "You say that now, but what about in 5 years? 10? When you see what your life could have been if you had married Constance?" Henry pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. "My life without you is not a life worth living. I have spent 6 months in a fog, going through motions, pretending I felt something I did not. Then I met you, and suddenly I was awake, really awake. I cannot go back to sleep, Margaret. What if I asked you to? What if I said I do not want you to break your engagement, that I want you to marry Constance and be happy? I would say you are lying. Your eyes are too honest to hide the truth." Margaret laughed through her tears. "Curse these honest eyes. Never. They are my favorite thing about you." "Well, one of my favorite things. There are quite a few favorite things." "Henry, be serious. We need to think this through logically." "I am done being logical. Logic says marry the mayor's daughter, combine the ranches, live a comfortable but empty life. My heart says something entirely different." "What does your heart say?" "That I would rather live in a one-room cabin with you than in a mansion with anyone else. That I would rather work twice as hard if it means coming home to you every night. That I want to build a life based on honesty and love, not obligation and business arrangements." Margaret kissed him then, a soft, tentative kiss that quickly deepened as months of suppressed feelings poured out. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "We cannot do this unless you are free," Margaret said firmly. "I will not be the other woman. You need to talk to Constance, really talk to her. Be honest about your feelings. Give her the choice of what to do with that information. She already knows I do not love her. Knowing and hearing it directly are different things. She deserves the truth, the full truth. And then, if she releases you from the engagement, you come back here. But not before, Henry. I mean it." Henry knew she was right. As much as he wanted to stay here with Margaret, to forget about everything else, that would not be the right way to start a life together. He needed to face Constance, face the consequences of his choices. "Tomorrow," he said. "I will go to her tomorrow and lay everything out honestly. Whatever happens after that happens." "Tomorrow," Margaret agreed. Henry kissed her once more, then forced himself to leave. He spent a sleepless night at his ranch, rehearsing what he would say to Constance, dreading the conversation but knowing it was necessary. The next morning, he rode back to the Whitmore ranch before he could lose his nerve. Mayor Whitmore himself answered the door, his face cold. "I am not sure you are welcome here, Hawthorne. I need to speak with Constance, sir. You have done enough damage, please. I owe her an honest conversation." The mayor looked like he wanted to refuse, but Constance appeared behind him. "Let him in, Daddy. We need to talk." They went into the parlor, an elaborately decorated room that had never felt comfortable to Henry. Constance sat in a high-backed chair, looking small and tired. Henry remained standing. "I need to be completely honest with you," Henry began. "You were right yesterday. I do have feelings for Margaret Thompson. I did not plan it, did not want it, but it happened. And I cannot marry you feeling the way I do. You deserve someone who loves you the way a husband should love his wife. I am not that man, Constance. I am sorry." Constance was quiet for a long moment. "I knew," she finally said. "I think I have known for weeks, but I did not want to admit it. I kept hoping you would come around, that you would see what we could have together. I tried. I wanted to honor our agreement. An agreement neither of us had much say in," Constance said bitterly. "Our fathers decided we would make a good match, and we just went along with it because it was easier than fighting." "Did you want to fight?" Constance looked up at him, and for the first time, Henry saw past the perfect facade to the real person underneath. "I do not know. Maybe. There is a man, a cavalry officer stationed at Fort Stanton. We met at a dance 6 months ago, right before you and I got engaged. He writes me letters that I hide in my dresser. But I could never be with him because Daddy has plans for me, and those plans involve you and your ranch." Henry sat down heavily. "We are a fine pair, are we not? Both of us trapped by expectations. So what do? We tell the truth. We call off the engagement, we deal with the fallout. Daddy will be furious, your father too, the whole town will gossip. Let them gossip. Better a short scandal than a lifetime of unhappiness." Constance twisted her hands in her lap. "I am scared. So am I, but I am more scared of living a lie. What about the ranches? The business arrangement? Our fathers can figure that out. We should not have to sacrifice our happiness for a business deal." Constance stood and walked to the window, looking out at the elaborate garden. "That seamstress, Margaret, she must be very special." "She is. But even if she was not in the picture, Constance, I do not think we would work. We do not talk about real things. We do not challenge each other. We are like two pieces from different puzzles trying to force ourselves to fit." "You are right." Constance turned back to him. "I will talk to Daddy. It will not be pleasant, but I will make him understand, or try to anyway." "Thank you." "Do not thank me. I am doing this for myself as much as for you. I do not want to spend my life with someone who is thinking about another woman." Henry stood. "For what it is worth, I hope your cavalry officer works out. For what it is worth, I hope your seamstress makes you happy." They shook hands, a formal ending to a formal arrangement. As Henry left, he could hear raised voices behind him as Mayor Whitmore began to understand what was happening. He did not envy Constance that conversation, but she was stronger than he had given her credit for. She would be fine. Henry rode directly to his father's ranch, knowing he needed to face that music as well. His father, Harold Hawthorne, was a hard man, built by years of frontier life and cattle ranching. He listened to Henry's explanation with a stony expression. "You are throwing away everything I built," Harold said when Henry finished. "The alliance with Whitmore, the expanded grazing rights, the business opportunities, all for some seamstress you have known for a few weeks. I am not throwing away anything, Pa. I am choosing a different path. A foolish path. What does this woman have to offer you? She has no land, no money, no connections. Just honest eyes, as you keep saying. Honest eyes do not feed cattle or maintain fences. No, but they make me want to be a better man. They make me want to work harder, build something real. You could have something real with Constance Whitmore. You could have the biggest ranch in the territory. I do not want the biggest ranch. I want a life with meaning, with love." Harold shook his head in disgust. "You sound like a schoolboy, not a 29-year-old man. Love fades, son. Property lasts. Maybe that is where we differ. I would rather have 30 years of real love than a lifetime of empty property." "Then you are a fool. But you are a grown man, so I cannot stop you. Just know that you are on your own. I will not help you rebuild what you are throwing away." The words hurt, but Henry had expected them. His father had never been one for sentiment or emotion. Business was all that mattered to him. "I understand." Henry left his father's ranch and rode straight back to Fort Sumner, to the Seamstress shop on 2nd Street. He tied up his horse and knocked on the door. Margaret opened it, her expression questioning. "I did it," Henry said. "I talked to Constance. She agreed to call off the engagement. I told my father, 'I am free, Margaret, if you still want me.'" Margaret pulled him inside and kissed him hard. "Of course I want you, you fool. I have wanted you since the beginning." They held each other in the middle of the shop, both laughing and crying at the same time. The future was uncertain, the path ahead rocky, but they would walk it together. The scandal, when it broke, was even worse than Henry had anticipated. The engagement party scheduled for the following week was canceled. Mayor Whitmore spread word that Henry had acted dishonorably. Some people in town sided with the mayor, others sympathized with Henry and Constance, and everyone had an opinion. Henry weathered it all with his head high, Margaret at his side. They married quickly, in a small ceremony at the church with just a few friends present. No elaborate wedding, no society guests, just vows spoken with complete honesty and love. The first year of marriage was hard. Henry's father refused to speak to him, and the expected alliance with Mayor Whitmore never materialized, which caused some business problems. Henry had to work twice as hard to keep his ranch running, taking on extra work where he could find it. But he came home every night to Margaret, to her honest eyes and her gentle strength. She continued her seamstress business, contributing to their household income and building a reputation as the finest seamstress in the territory. They were partners in every sense of the word. One evening, about 8 months after their wedding, Henry came home to find Margaret sitting at her sewing table, crying softly. He rushed to her side, terrified something was wrong. "What is it? Are you hurt?" Margaret looked up at him with a radiant smile through her tears. "I am pregnant." Joy exploded through Henry's chest. He picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing. "We are going to have a baby. We are going to have a baby." That night, lying in bed with Margaret's head on his chest, Henry felt a contentment he had never known before. This was what life was supposed to feel like. Not the empty formality of his engagement to Constance, but this warmth, this partnership, this love. The baby, a boy they named James, was born the following spring in 1879. He had Margaret's honest eyes and Henry's stubborn jaw. Holding his son for the first time, Henry thought about his own father, about the distance and coldness that had defined their relationship. He vowed to do better, to be present, to show his children the love his father had never shown him. Word of the baby reached Harold Hawthorne, and a week after James was born, the old man showed up at their door. Henry answered warily, protective of his new family. "I want to meet my grandson," Harold said gruffly. Henry stepped aside to let him in. Margaret was in the rocking chair, holding James. She looked up at Harold with those honest eyes, unafraid. "This is James," she said simply, adjusting the blanket so Harold could see the baby's face. Something in Harold's expression softened as he looked at his grandson. "He looks like you did as a baby. Would you like to hold him?" Margaret offered. Harold took the baby awkwardly, his weathered rancher's hands surprisingly gentle. He stared down at James for a long moment, and when he looked up, his eyes were wet. "I was wrong," Harold said to Henry. "I told you love fades and property lasts, but seeing this boy, knowing he exists because you chose love over land, I realize I was wrong. Property is empty without family to share it with. I built an empire, but I did it at the cost of really knowing my own son. Do not make the same mistake I did." It was the closest Harold had ever come to an apology, and Henry accepted it for what it was. "You are welcome here anytime, Pa. James should know his grandfather." Over the following months, Harold became a regular visitor, slowly building a relationship with his son that they had never had before. He taught James to ride as soon as the boy was old enough, and the two of them formed a bond that brought Henry great joy. Meanwhile, Fort Sumner continued to grow and change. The town was becoming more civilized, with new businesses opening and new families arriving. The scandal of Henry's broken engagement became old news, replaced by fresh gossip. Constance Whitmore, as it turned out, had indeed married her cavalry officer. The wedding was small, as she and Lieutenant Marcus Brennan wanted to avoid the spectacle her engagement to Henry had become. Henry and Margaret sent a gift and a note of congratulations. Constance responded with a thank-you letter that included a line Henry never forgot. "You were right. Choosing love was worth the scandal." Margaret's seamstress business thrived. Women came from all over the territory to have dresses made by her, drawn by her skill and her reputation for honest dealing. She hired 2 assistants to help manage the workload, training them in the techniques her mother had taught her. Henry's ranch also prospered, though it never became as large as it would have if he had married Constance. He did not care. He worked hard, built a reputation as a fair dealer and a skilled rancher, and came home every night to a family that loved him. When James was 2 years old, Margaret became pregnant again. This time, she gave birth to twin daughters, Sarah and Emma. The house that Henry built for them on his ranch land was suddenly full of noise and laughter and life. Harold, watching his son with his grandchildren, remarked one day, "You are a better father than I ever was." "You taught me what to do differently," Henry said diplomatically. "I suppose that is something." The years passed in a blur of ranch work and family life. James grew into a serious boy who loved horses and seemed destined to follow Henry into ranching. Sarah and Emma were inseparable, one thoughtful and quiet, the other bold and adventurous. Margaret continued her seamstress work, though she scaled back as the children grew. She found joy in teaching Sarah to sew, passing on the skills her mother had taught her. Emma showed no interest in sewing but loved helping Henry with the horses. One evening, when James was 8 and the twins were 6, the family gathered on the porch of their home to watch the sunset. It had been a good day, productive and peaceful. Henry sat in his rocking chair, Margaret beside him, the children playing at their feet. "Are you happy?" Margaret asked suddenly. Henry looked at her, at those honest eyes that still captured his heart after all these years. "More than I ever thought possible. You, completely. I think about where we might be if you had married Constance, if we had never admitted our feelings, the life we would have missed. I cannot even imagine that life anymore. This is the only life I want." Margaret took his hand. "No regrets." Not a single one. It was the truth. Henry had given up social status, business opportunities, and his father's approval for a time. But he had gained something far more valuable, a life filled with authentic love and honest connection. Every morning he woke up grateful, and every night he went to bed content. Mayor Whitmore eventually softened toward them as well. His daughter was happy with her cavalry officer, and he could not argue with that result. He and Henry would never be friends, but they managed a cordial relationship when their paths crossed in town. The business alliance between the Hawthorne and Whitmore ranches never materialized, but Henry found other partnerships, other ways to grow his operation. He was never the richest rancher in the territory, but he was successful enough to provide well for his family and employ several ranch hands who became like extended family. Through it all, Margaret remained his anchor and his partner. She had a way of seeing through problems to solutions, of offering advice without judgment, of supporting him while also challenging him to be better. Her honest eyes never lied, never manipulated, never played games. What you saw was what you got, and what you got was extraordinary. When James turned 15, he told Henry he wanted to learn to manage the ranch, to eventually take it over. Henry swelled with pride but made sure his son understood the work involved, the responsibility. James proved himself up to the challenge, working long hours alongside Henry, learning every aspect of the operation. The twins developed in different directions. Sarah fell in love with a young man who worked at the general store, a kind fellow named Thomas Wells who treated her with respect and devotion. Emma, meanwhile, announced she wanted to become a teacher, shocking everyone but Margaret. "She has your independent spirit," Margaret told Henry. "She wants to make her own path. As long as she is happy, that is all that matters." It was something Harold would never have said, but Henry meant it completely. He wanted his children to choose their own paths, to follow their hearts as he had followed his. In 1895, when Henry was 46 and Margaret 43, they celebrated their 17th wedding anniversary. Their children were grown or nearly so. Their ranch was prosperous, and they had built a life that exceeded anything Henry had imagined that day in the Crescent Saloon, when a woman with honest eyes had crashed through a window and into his heart. They took a rare trip alone, just the two of them, to Santa Fe. They stayed in a nice hotel, ate at fine restaurants, and walked through the plaza like young lovers. One evening, sitting in the hotel room, Margaret turned to Henry with a mischievous smile. "Do you remember what you said to me the night you came to my shop after talking to Constance?" "I said a lot of things that night. You said you would rather live in a one-room cabin with me than a mansion with anyone else. I meant every word. I know you did, and I have been thinking. We have raised our children, built our life. What if we sold the ranch, bought a smaller piece of land, built that cabin?" Henry looked at her in surprise. "Are you serious?" "Completely. James is ready to run his own operation. He could buy the ranch from us, maybe with help from your father. We could finally have that simple life we talked about, just you and me and a cabin." The idea was tempting, but Henry shook his head. "We cannot sell the ranch. It has been in my family for 2 generations. So we give it to James. The point is not the money. The point is simplifying, spending our remaining years focused on what matters most, each other." Henry pulled Margaret close. "You are what matters most. You always have been, but I do not need a cabin to prove that. I am happy where we are." "You are sure?" "Because I want you to know I mean it. I would give up everything tomorrow if that is what you wanted." "I know. And that is exactly why I love you. You have never needed things or status or recognition. You have always just needed honesty and love. Those are the only things that last anyway." They stayed up late that night, talking about their life, their children, their future. They decided to stay on the ranch, but to gradually transfer more responsibility to James, giving themselves more freedom to travel and explore. It was not the cabin Margaret had suggested, but it was a compromise that worked for both of them. The next year brought more changes. Sarah married Thomas Wells in a beautiful ceremony that Margaret helped plan. Emma left for normal school in Las Cruces, determined to become a teacher. And Harold Hawthorne, now 78 years old, suffered a stroke that left him weak and unable to manage on his own. Henry brought his father to live with them, giving him a room in their home and making sure he was comfortable. Harold, humbled by age and illness, became softer, more openly affectionate with his grandchildren and even with Henry. One afternoon, sitting on the porch together, Harold said, "I want to tell you something I should have said years ago. You made the right choice, son. Choosing Margaret, choosing love. I was too blind and stubborn to see it then, but you built something I never had. A real family held together by love, not just by land and legacy. I am proud of you." Henry felt tears sting his eyes. "Thank you, Pa, that means more than you know." Harold passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 months later, surrounded by family. At the funeral, people remarked on how lucky Harold had been to spend his final years surrounded by love. Henry knew his father would have agreed. After Harold's death, Henry inherited his father's ranch, though he immediately signed it over to James. The young man, now 21, was ready to manage both properties to build his own legacy. Henry and Margaret finally took that step back they had discussed, spending more time together, taking trips, enjoying the life they had built. They traveled to San Francisco in 1898, seeing the ocean for the first time together. They visited Emma in Las Cruces, watching her graduate from normal school with honors. They attended Sarah's first child's birth, becoming grandparents themselves and marveling at the continuation of their family line. Through it all, they remained deeply in love. Friends and family often commented on how they looked at each other, how they held hands even after 20 years of marriage, how they seemed to communicate without words. They were what marriage should be, people said. A partnership of equals, built on honesty and love. In 1900, as the new century dawned, Henry and Margaret sat on their porch watching another sunset. They were both in their early 50s now, their hair showing gray, their bodies marked by years of hard work. But their love was as strong as ever, perhaps stronger, deepened by time and experience. "Do you ever wonder what happened to Constance?" Margaret asked. "Sometimes. I hope she is happy." "I saw her in town last month. She was visiting her father with her husband and 3 children. She looked content, good. She deserved happiness too. She thanked me, actually. Said that I did her a favor by falling in love with you, because it freed her to find real love herself." Henry smiled. "Funny how things work out. If that drunk had not crashed through the saloon window, if I had not stepped in to help, if I had not walked you to the doctor's office, our whole lives would be different." "I do not believe that," Margaret said. "I think we would have found each other somehow. Some things are meant to be." "You believe in fate. I believe in love. And I believe that real love finds a way, no matter the obstacles." Henry kissed her then, a kiss full of 17 years of partnership and passion and profound friendship. When they pulled apart, Margaret's honest eyes were shining. "I love you, Henry Hawthorne." "I love you too, Margaret Hawthorne. Today, tomorrow, and every day after that." The years continued to pass, bringing both joys and sorrows. Emma married a fellow teacher, a man named Robert Sanders, who shared her passion for education. They moved to Albuquerque to teach at a larger school. Sarah and Thomas had 3 children, giving Henry and Margaret more grandchildren to dote on. James married a rancher's daughter named Catherine, and they had 2 sons who would eventually inherit the combined Hawthorne properties. Henry and Margaret watched their family grow and expand, their legacy secured not through land or business deals, but through love and the values they had instilled in their children. Hard work, honesty, compassion, and the courage to follow your heart even when it was difficult. In 1910, when Henry was 61 and Margaret 58, they decided to finally build that cabin Margaret had suggested years earlier. Not to live in permanently, but as a retreat, a place to escape when they wanted solitude. They chose a spot on a hill overlooking the valley, with views of the mountains in the distance. They built it themselves, with occasional help from their children and grandchildren. It was a labor of love, each nail hammered with intention, each board placed with care. When it was finished, it was nothing fancy, just a single room with a fireplace, a bed, a table, and 2 chairs. But it was theirs, built with their own hands, a symbol of the simple life they had always valued. They spent weekends at the cabin, talking for hours like they had in the early days, remembering their past and dreaming about their future. Margaret brought her sewing, and Henry brought books he had always meant to read. They cooked simple meals over the fireplace and slept under handmade quilts and made love like much younger people. One night at the cabin, lying in bed with Margaret curled against his chest, Henry said, "I have been thinking about writing down our story. For the grandchildren, so they know how we met, how we fell in love. That is a wonderful idea, though I am not sure how interesting they will find it, just a cowboy and a seamstress who fell in love. It is more than that. It is about having the courage to choose love over obligation. About building a life on honesty instead of convenience. Those are lessons worth passing down. Then write it all down, the good and the bad, how hard it was sometimes, but how it was always worth it." Henry did write it down, spending months crafting the story of how he had been engaged to the mayor's daughter until he met a seamstress with honest eyes. He wrote about the scandal, the difficulties, the joys, the building of a life together. He wrote honestly, holding nothing back, because that was what Margaret had always given him, and what he wanted to give their family in return. When he finished, he gathered the family together and read the story aloud. By the end, many eyes were wet, including his own. His grandchildren asked questions, wanting to know more details, more stories. Henry and Margaret spent the rest of the day telling tales from their life, passing on their history to the next generation. In 1915, Margaret fell ill. It started as a cough that would not go away, then weakness, then fever. The doctor in Fort Sumner was not sure what it was, but he was not optimistic. Henry refused to accept the diagnosis, taking her to Santa Fe, to Albuquerque, to every doctor he could find. But the answer was always the same. Her lungs were failing and there was nothing they could do. They returned to Fort Sumner, to the cabin on the hill. Henry cared for Margaret himself, refusing to let anyone else take over. He cooked her meals, helped her dress, held her when the coughing fits racked her body. Their children came to visit, bringing the grandchildren, filling the cabin with love and family. On a warm evening in late summer, Margaret's breathing became labored. Henry lay beside her on the bed, holding her close. Their children sat around them silent, knowing the end was near. "Henry," Margaret whispered, her voice so faint he had to lean close to hear. "No regrets, not a single one. You gave me the best life a man could ask for. You gave me honest love. That is all I ever wanted. I will love you forever, Margaret, in this life and whatever comes next. I know, I will love you too, always." Margaret took one more breath, her honest eyes looking into Henry's one final time, and then she was gone. Henry held her for a long time, unwilling to let go, feeling like his own heart had stopped beating. The funeral was attended by what seemed like half the territory. Margaret had touched many lives through her kindness, her skill, and her example of living with integrity. Henry stood at the graveside, surrounded by his children and grandchildren, and spoke about the woman who had changed his life. "I was supposed to marry someone else," he said. "I was engaged to the mayor's daughter, following a path laid out by obligation and expectation. Then a woman with honest eyes crashed into my life, and suddenly I understood what love really meant. Margaret taught me that living authentically is worth any sacrifice, that honesty is more valuable than status, and that love is the only thing that truly lasts. I am the man I am because of her. Our family exists because of her courage and her love. She will never be forgotten." After the funeral, Henry returned to the cabin alone. His children wanted him to come stay with them, but he needed solitude, needed to feel close to Margaret in the place they had built together. He spent his days remembering, reading the story he had written, looking at the life they had created. Henry lived for 5 more years after Margaret died. He spent time with his children and grandchildren, watched his great-grandchildren be born, saw the ranch continue to prosper under James's management. But he was never the same without Margaret. A part of him had died with her, and he was simply waiting to be reunited. He returned often to the cabin on the hill, sometimes with family, sometimes alone. He would sit in one of the chairs they had placed there together and talk to Margaret as if she were sitting beside him. He told her about the grandchildren, about the changes in Fort Sumner, about how much he missed her. On a spring morning in 1920, Henry was found in the cabin, sitting in his chair, a peaceful expression on his face. He had died quietly in his sleep, and in his hand was a letter addressed to Margaret, telling her he was coming, that he would find her wherever she was, that their love would continue beyond death. The family buried him beside Margaret, under a cottonwood tree with a view of the mountains they had both loved. On the shared headstone James had carved, Henry and Margaret Hawthorne. They chose love, and it made all the difference. The story of Henry and Margaret became family legend, passed down through generations. How Henry had been engaged to marry the mayor's daughter, how he had met a seamstress with honest eyes, how he had chosen love over obligation. Their cabin on the hill was maintained by the family, a retreat and a reminder of what really mattered. James ran the ranch until he was too old, then passed it to his sons. Sarah's children became successful in various trades. Emma's descendants included several teachers who continued her passion for education. The Hawthorne family tree grew and branched, but at its root was the love between a cowboy and a seamstress who had dared to follow their hearts. In Fort Sumner, Margaret's shop building still stood, though it had changed hands many times. A historical marker was eventually placed there, telling the story of Margaret Thompson, renowned seamstress and beloved member of the community. Tourists would stop to read it, to imagine what life had been like in those Wild West days. The legacy Henry and Margaret left was not one of vast wealth or political power. It was something simpler and more profound. A family built on love and honesty, descendants who valued integrity over convenience, and a story that reminded people that choosing love is always worth the cost. Years after Henry's death, one of his great-granddaughters was cleaning out the cabin and found a journal Margaret had kept. In it were her own thoughts about falling in love with Henry, about the difficult decision to pursue that love despite the obstacles, about building a life together. The final entry, written shortly before she died, read, "I have lived a good life, not because it was easy or comfortable, but because it was true. I followed my heart when it would have been easier to stay silent. I loved a man who had the courage to choose authenticity over obligation. We built a life based on honesty, and that life was beautiful. If I could go back and change anything, I would not. Every moment, every struggle, every joy was worth it because we faced it together with open hearts and honest eyes. That is what love is supposed to be. That is what life is supposed to be. I have no regrets." The journal was preserved and eventually donated to the New Mexico Historical Society, where it sits today, a testament to a love that changed everything. Students study it, researchers reference it, but mostly it serves as a reminder that even in the harsh reality of the Wild West, love could flourish and transform lives. The story of Henry Hawthorne and Margaret Thompson became more than just family history. It became a piece of New Mexico folklore, a tale told to illustrate that following your heart takes courage, but brings rewards that cannot be measured in land or money. Their choice to prioritize love over social expectations challenged the norms of their time and created ripples that extended far beyond their own lives. In the end, Henry's choice to break his engagement to Constance Whitmore was not an act of dishonor. as some had claimed. It was an act of profound honesty, both to himself and to Constance. It freed them both to find authentic love. It showed their community that marriage should be based on genuine connection, not just business arrangements or social climbing. The scandal that seemed so devastating at the time became just a footnote in a much larger story of love, family, and living with integrity. Henry and Margaret proved that the courageous choice, while difficult in the moment, pays dividends for a lifetime and beyond. Their cabin on the hill still stands, maintained by their descendants, a place of pilgrimage for family members who want to connect with their roots. Inside, the simple furnishings remain: the handmade table, the 2 chairs, the bed with its handmade quilt. On the mantel sits a photograph of Henry and Margaret, taken in their 50s, still holding hands, still looking at each other with obvious love. Visitors to the cabin often remark on the feeling of peace there, as if the love Henry and Margaret shared somehow imprinted on the place itself. Young couples come to make promises to each other, inspired by the story. Older couples come to remember why they chose each other, to reconnect with the feelings that brought them together. The Hawthorne family continues to thrive, now spread across multiple states, engaged in various professions and pursuits. But they all know the story of their ancestors, the cowboy who was engaged to the mayor's daughter until he met a seamstress with honest eyes. They carry that story as a reminder of what matters most, of the courage it takes to follow your heart, of the rewards that come from living authentically. And in Fort Sumner, New Mexico, when people talk about the old days, about the characters and personalities that shaped the town, they always mention Henry and Margaret. Not because they were the richest or most powerful, but because they showed what love looks like when it is real, when it is chosen despite obstacles, when it is built on a foundation of honesty and mutual respect. Their love story, which began with broken glass and honest eyes, proved that sometimes the most important thing you can do is have the courage to change course, to admit what your heart really wants, and to build a life based on truth rather than obligation. It was a lesson that resonated far beyond their own time, a message that remains relevant whenever people face the choice between what is expected and what is true. Henry and Margaret's descendants carry on their legacy not just through genetics, but through values. They have been taught to value honesty over convenience, love over obligation, authenticity over appearance. They have been taught that the courageous choice is often the right choice, even when it comes with costs. They have been taught that a life well lived is measured not in acres or dollars, but in love given and received, in relationships built and maintained, in integrity preserved even when it would be easier to compromise. The story of he who was engaged to the mayor's daughter, until the cowboy met a seamstress with honest eyes, became a touchstone for the community, a reminder that love matters most, that honest connection is worth fighting for, and that the Wild West, for all its harshness and difficulty, was also a place where people could choose their own paths, follow their hearts, and build lives of meaning and purpose. Henry and Margaret did exactly that, and their love, honest and true from the beginning, lasted not just through their lifetimes, but echoed forward through generations, a beacon showing the way toward what really matters in life. They found each other against all odds, chose each other despite all obstacles, and built a life together that became a legend, not because it was easy or glamorous, but because it was real, honest, and filled with the kind of love that changes everything it touches. That was their legacy, and it endures.